November 24, 1971, Portland International Airport. A man in his mid-40s stepped onto Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, bound for Seattle. He was dressed in a black suit, white shirt, and a narrow black tie. He wore dark sunglasses despite the dim airport lighting. In his right hand, he carried a simple briefcase. The boarding agent barely noticed him. Just another business traveler heading home for Thanksgiving. The Boeing 727-100 was only partially full, with 36 passengers and 6 crew members. Among them was Captain William Scott, an experienced pilot with thousands of flight hours, and Florence Schaffner, the flight attendant assigned to first class. Also on board was James "Jim" Calloway, a firefighter from Seattle returning home after visiting his brother in Portland. He had chosen a window seat near the back of the plane, hoping for a quiet flight. As the aircraft taxied to the runway, the man in seat 18C lit a cigarette. The smoke curled lazily in the air, mixing with the stale scent of recycled oxygen. No one paid him any attention until he slipped a small note into Florence Schaffner's hand. She smiled politely, assuming it was another businessman's attempt at flirtation. Without reading it, she tucked the note into her pocket and turned away. "Miss," the man said, his voice calm but firm, "you might want to read that." Florence hesitated before unfolding the small piece of paper. The message was written in neat block letters. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I want $200,000 in cash, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck ready in Seattle. No funny business, or everyone dies." Her pulse quickened. She glanced at him. He nodded slightly and, in a casual motion, unlatched his briefcase just enough for her to glimpse inside. A tangle of wires, red cylinders. Real or not, she had no way to tell. Heart pounding, she walked toward the cockpit. Jim Calloway, watching from a few rows back, noticed her expression. As a firefighter, he recognized the look. Controlled panic, the kind seen when someone had seconds to react to life or death situations. Something was wrong. In the cockpit, Captain Scott listened carefully as Florence relayed the note's contents. His mind raced through possibilities. A hijacking, the first in Northwest Orient's history. Back in the cabin, the man in seat 18C adjusted his sunglasses and took another drag of his cigarette. Outside, rain streaked the windows. The flight was only 20 minutes in, but tonight history was about to be made. The Boeing 727-100 soared above the Pacific Northwest, the city lights of Portland fading into the distance. Inside the cockpit, Captain William Scott relayed the hijacker's demands to air traffic control. The response from Northwest Orient Airlines headquarters in Minneapolis was swift. Comply with everything. In the cabin, Florence Schaffner returned to the hijacker's seat. She spoke carefully, her voice steady despite the fear constricting her throat. "They're arranging everything. It'll be ready in Seattle." The man nodded, flicking ash from his cigarette into the armrest ashtray. "Good," he said. His voice remained calm, almost polite. "Tell the pilot to stay on course. No deviations." Florence hesitated. "Sir, may I see your identification?" The man smiled slightly. "Sure," he said, reaching into his pocket. He handed her a plane ticket. Printed on it was the name Dan Cooper. By now, murmurs were spreading among the passengers. Jim Calloway, seated a few rows behind, had a firefighter's instinct. He recognized danger before most. He watched Schaffner's stiff posture, the way she kept glancing toward one particular passenger. Something was happening. Across the aisle, a businessman in his 30s leaned toward Jim. "You see that guy?" he whispered. "He's acting strange. He hasn't touched his drink." Jim's eyes narrowed. The man in seat 18C hadn't ordered food or alcohol. He simply sat, chain-smoking Raleigh cigarettes, occasionally checking his watch. Waiting. In the cockpit, Captain Scott kept his voice measured as he spoke with air traffic control. "We need the money in $20 bills, non-sequential. 4 parachutes, 2 back and 2 reserve. We'll land in Seattle, but keep the engines running." Outside, the sky darkened. The rain picked up, streaking against the cabin windows. Back in first class, Florence hesitated before asking, What's your plan after Seattle? Dan Cooper exhaled a slow stream of smoke. We'll get there when we get there, he said. Jim Calloway clenched his fists. His job as a firefighter meant facing life-threatening situations. But this, he was powerless. His training told him to wait, to assess, to act only when necessary. But when would that moment come? As the aircraft approached Seattle, the entire Pacific Northwest was holding its breath. The FBI was preparing. The ransom money was being gathered. Law enforcement was scrambling. And Dan Cooper? He was in complete control. At 5:39 p.m., Flight 305 began its descent into Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The rain had intensified, sheets of water cascading over the tarmac as law enforcement and airline officials scrambled to prepare. A briefcase full of $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills, 4 parachutes in a fuel truck awaited at the designated spot. Inside the cabin, tension thickened. Passengers remained unaware of the full gravity of the situation, only that their arrival had been delayed. Some fidgeted in their seats, others glanced out the window. Jim Calloway, the off-duty firefighter, stayed alert. His instincts screamed that something was wrong. The plane landed smoothly at 5:46 p.m., taxiing to a remote section of the airport. The engines remained running, just as the hijacker demanded. The cabin lights flickered, shadows stretching across Dan Cooper's face. He turned to Florence Schaffner. Send the money and parachutes up the front stairs, then let the passengers go. Florence relayed the message to Captain Scott, who passed it to the authorities outside. Minutes later, a ground crew member cautiously approached the aircraft, placing the ransom money and parachutes at the top of the stairway before retreating into the storm. Cooper opened his briefcase, briefly inspecting the cash. Satisfied, he nodded. Get them off. The cabin doors were unsealed, and one by one, the passengers shuffled down the stairs, relief washing over them as they reached safety. Jim Calloway hesitated. He didn't like leaving the crew behind with the hijacker, but he had no choice. As he stepped onto the rain-slicked tarmac, he stole one last look at Dan Cooper, who sat calmly in his seat, as if he were just another traveler waiting for a layover. Once the passengers were clear, Florence and another flight attendant moved toward the exit. But before she could leave, Cooper raised a hand. I need you, he said, motioning to Tina Mucklow, the remaining flight attendant. The rest can go. Tina swallowed hard but nodded. The others hurried down the stairs, disappearing into the chaos outside. Now only 6 people remained on board. Cooper, Tina, Captain Scott, First Officer William Radasak, Flight Engineer Harold Anderson, and the silent storm raging beyond the cockpit windows. Cooper turned to the pilot. Refuel the plane. We're going to Mexico City. Captain Scott met his gaze. We don't have enough fuel for that distance. Cooper took another drag of his cigarette and exhaled slowly. Then we'll fly until we don't. By 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 was airborne again, climbing into the stormy night. The aircraft followed a carefully dictated flight path, south-southeast, heading toward Mexico City, but at an unusually low altitude of 10,000 feet, with a speed of approximately 170 knots. Dan Cooper had been specific about these instructions. The altitude was low enough to keep the cabin unpressurized. The speed was slow enough for something unnatural, something no ordinary passenger would attempt. In the dimly lit cabin, Tina Mucklow sat quietly near the cockpit, watching as Cooper rummaged through the parachutes. His demeanor was unchanged, calm, calculated. He took a moment to remove his black tie, rolling it up neatly and placing it on the seat beside him. It was the only thing he left behind. In the cockpit, Captain Scott and his crew exchanged tense glances. They had been ordered to remain inside, the door shut tight. None of them knew what Cooper was doing, but they all suspected the same thing. He was getting ready to jump. Meanwhile, Jim Calloway, now safely on the ground, had refused to leave the airport. As a firefighter, his job was to run toward danger, not away from it. He stood near a group of FBI agents, watching the radar screen as the aircraft moved further south. The agent in charge, Ralph Himmelsbach, exhaled sharply. We've got 2 F-106 fighter jets trailing him at a distance. he muttered. "They'll keep visual contact." Jim frowned. "And if he jumps?" Himmelsbach shook his head. "Then we may never find him." Back on the plane, at exactly 8:13 p.m., a warning light flashed in the cockpit. The aft stairway had been deployed. The crew felt a sudden change in air pressure as the rear stairs opened mid-flight. Wind roared through the lower fuselage. Captain Scott gripped the controls, steadying the Boeing 727 as it lurched slightly. Somewhere in the darkness, Dan Cooper stood at the edge of the stairway, wind tearing at his suit. The rain pelted against his face. Below him, the endless forests of Washington and Oregon stretched for miles. Nothing but blackness and storm clouds. Then, without hesitation, he jumped. The crew remained in their seats, the cockpit sealed shut. No one saw him go. No one heard a scream, a struggle, only the relentless howl of the wind. By 8:15 p.m., he was gone. The greatest unsolved mystery in American aviation had just begun. At 10:15 p.m., Flight 305 touched down at Reno Tahoe International Airport. The crew had been ordered to keep flying until they were sure Cooper was gone. The FBI and local law enforcement swarmed the tarmac, weapons ready. But when the agents stormed the cabin, they found exactly what the pilots had suspected. Dan Cooper had vanished. His black tie lay on a seat. The rear stairway was still partially lowered. But of the man himself, there was no trace, no parachute, no briefcase, no ransom money. The investigation erupted immediately. By midnight, FBI agents had pinpointed the likely jump zone, a stretch of dense wilderness along the Washington-Oregon border near the Lewis River. The storm that night had been relentless, the winds erratic. If Cooper had jumped at 8:13 p.m., as the cockpit's pressure change indicated, he had landed somewhere in an area of rugged forests, icy rivers, and sheer cliffs. At the FBI's Seattle office, Agent Ralph Himmelsbach spread out a topographical map. His team was already organizing a ground search. Across the room, Jim Calloway studied the map in silence. He knew the terrain well. He had fought wildfires in the same region. If Cooper had landed anywhere near the Washougal River or Mount St. Helens, the odds of survival were slim. Jim spoke up. "If he didn't plan this perfectly, he's dead." Himmelsbach looked up. "And if he did?" Jim exhaled, glancing at the heavy rain still falling outside. "Then we've got a ghost on our hands." The search began at first light. FBI agents, local law enforcement, and military helicopters scoured the forests, scanning the thick canopy below. Bloodhounds were brought in. Divers combed the freezing waters of the Lewis River. But the results were always the same: nothing. No footprints, no parachute, no body. Then weeks later, a farmer near the tiny town of Ariel, Washington came forward. He claimed to have seen a man walking alone on a dirt road late that night, soaked from head to toe. He had assumed the man was a lost hunter. The FBI raced to investigate, but again there was no proof it was Cooper. Days turned to months. The trail grew colder. Some believed he had died in the wilderness. Others swore he had escaped, that he had pulled off the perfect crime. But if Dan Cooper had survived, where was he? Months passed, then years. Dan Cooper never resurfaced. The FBI poured countless hours into the case, interviewing suspects, analyzing evidence, and chasing every lead. But nothing ever led to Cooper himself. No one claimed the marked ransom bills. No parachute was ever found. Until 1978, a deer hunter deep in the forest near Tanabar, along the Columbia River, stumbled across something strange: a rotting piece of a Boeing 727 stairway placard, partially buried in the dirt. It had likely fallen off the plane midair. Then, in 1980, an even bigger break. A young boy digging along the same riverbank unearthed 3 stacks of $20 bills, $5,800 in total, still wrapped in their original bank bands. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. Had Cooper buried it? Had it washed down the river from where he landed? Or had it been left behind? An eerie clue that he hadn't made it out alive. For Jim Calloway, the mystery remained an obsession. Even after returning to firefighting, he followed the case, certain there was something everyone was missing. Over the years, he had responded to dozens of wilderness rescues, some successful, others ending in tragedy. But Cooper's case? It haunted him. No body, no gear, no answers. Theories ran wild. Some believed Cooper had died that night, his parachute caught in the towering fir trees. Others insisted he had survived, a mastermind who had planned his escape down to the last detail. Some claimed he was a rogue military veteran, trained in high-altitude jumps. Others swore he had been a man with nothing left to lose, choosing a final gamble over an ordinary life. Decades later, the FBI officially closed the case in 2016. D.B. Cooper had beaten them, but even now his name lingers like a shadow in American folklore. The only unsolved case of air piracy in U.S. history. Somewhere in the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, the truth still waits. Buried beneath layers of time, lost to the whispers of wind and rain. And whether he perished in the wilderness or vanished into the world, one fact remains. Dan Cooper jumped into the storm and was never seen again. The legend lives on. Thanks for watching Brave Sparks. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more powerful and inspiring stories. Stay brave and we'll see you in the next one.